our friend, a mentor, and of course our fearless leader. Right now, put your hands together. Everybody stand up for Dr. Guy Riekeman.
Thank you. Thank you. I was supposed to do a philosophy talk. It seems a little inappropriate, but I'm going to put a couple slides up. There are a couple slides that were up here, that needed to be up here, that weren't up here. And the reason is, you got for me things. I appreciate the accolades, the comments about showing up at life, etc. Nobody gets here, and nobody does this a little bit down by themselves. I was thinking how inappropriate it was to get that kind of acknowledgement, because when I got to life, River and I were driving with Ruth around in his Cadillac all over the country raising money. And I have to tell you, the first stop we were at was with 5 chiropractors in Detroit, Michigan, who wrote us each a check for $100,000 each, $500,000, which you have to know was the worst investment you could possibly make at that particular time. Not only were they not going to ever get the money back, it wasn't a loan, but they were investing it into a black hole at Life University. And I have to tell you, while I get to stand up and get awards for some of those things, it was River that put those people in the room, and it was his life with those people that caused them to write those checks that night. So to think that it was me individually, and that was only a metaphor of 1,000 things that happened, to be able to be in a position to, I guess, be like Jerry pointed out, the front person for a movement, right? It's the front person for a movement. And ultimately, the biggest movement of all is the movement that we don't control, because I don't believe that any of us, even though we work really hard, unless the universe is blessing us, we're not going to get anywhere. We're just part of a big universal plan. The more and more I hear from students about how they got involved in chiropractic, the more and more I realize, as we all talk about, that we didn't choose chiropractic, chiropractic chose us. And it's the same. We didn't choose to be presidents. The universe chose us to be presidents of colleges and boards of directors and my bosses and those kinds of things. Hard work, you have to do it, but the other door has to open up from the universe if things are going to happen. So there's a couple of the people I'd like to acknowledge, because I have to tell you, I got the best job in the world, right? If you have to work for someone, and I hate working for anyone other than myself, because I'm always right, and I have to convince them that I'm right all the time. But if I have to work for someone, I have to tell you, the Board of Trustees at Life University is the best boss you could possibly have. People oftentimes ask me, what was the difference between Palmer and Life? And at Palmer, they were always telling me, slow down, slow down, slow down, slow down. And at Life, every time we get together, they're going, go faster, go faster, go faster, go faster. And that's why we've moved forward. I was thinking, too, the other day about, I heard a lot of points, but the theme of my life has always been basically the same. How do we get everybody on the planet access to chiropractic care? That's it for me, right? How do we get chiropractic available to every single person on the planet? And of course, the lifestyle that it implies, I'm going to put up a couple of things. Because while vaccinations, for example, are not a chiropractic issue, our philosophy gives us an opinion about that. Wouldn't you agree? While drugs are not a chiropractic issue, our philosophy gives us an opinion about drugs. It's a lifestyle that this philosophy implies that goes beyond just the adjustment. The adjustment is at the core of it. I was just thinking the other day that all the colleges, I agree with Jim, either I've done a lot or I can't hold a job. I can't figure out which one, right? But we helped Sherman get going. It was great being there. It was fun to go to Palmer, but at Palmer, the best part was we created the first chiropractic school in Brazil, right, in South America. And that school's up and running. It's a principled chiropractic school in that part of the world. Now we've got Europe coming, Rome coming. China is shortly after that. And I got to be at Life, and I'm thinking, how many people have ever had the privilege of starting in our profession what will ultimately be, I'm sure by the time we get done, I get done, at least 5 new chiropractic colleges in the world. The only one I'm a little questioning about is Palmer, Florida, but we're waiting for them to come around, right? So, and I know with friends, and I can say that. But there's a couple of things I wanted to point out, so forget this presentation. Here. This is my dad. He's the kindest, sweetest, most gentle man I'd ever known, which means I take after my mother. So, right? He graduated in 1947 and went to Albuquerque, New Mexico, and he and my mom set up practice on South Central Avenue in Albuquerque. And I think River was the one that mentioned earlier, we don't have to go to jail for chiropractic anymore. They did. They did. You follow me? In New Mexico, they had licensure at the time, but they had 2 boards back then. The students can't even relate to this today. There was a basic science board you had to pass first, then you could take the chiropractic board. If you were a dentist, you had to pass the basic science board first, then you could take the dental board. The basic science boards were basically what part 1 of national boards are today. Diagnosis, chemistry, anatomy. They were all essay, and they were all given by medical doctors in every state. And so in New Mexico, while there was licensure for chiropractic, you couldn't get past the medical board to even get to sit for the chiropractic exam in New Mexico. They let a few people dribble through. So my dad and 3 other chiropractors had to take that on. And 2 of them had their offices firebombed, the windows blown right out of the front of their offices. The others had all their records. People came in, gassed their records, and burned all their files right in the middle of the night. That's what they were up to. My mom just passed away at 93, just before Thanksgiving last year. Until 3 weeks before she got really sick, she worked in this office since 1947, and the little girl in the picture is my sister, Kathy, who's a chiropractor that graduated in 1974, went in with my dad, and then took the practice over when he passed away. So the office has been running continuously since 1947. And my mom worked there every single day since 1947. Now, don't give her an award, right? Because she complained every single day when she went to the office because she couldn't find anyone since 1947 to run the front desk correctly. So she had to go in every day and do it because nobody else could do it right. That was just my mom, right? So this was my dad. This picture was taken in 1954, and my sister, who was 2 at the time, who's a chiropractor today. And then this was, some of you will appreciate this, this is my sister on the left with the sunglasses, and myself and my wife, Deb, who's also a chiropractor, still today in Colorado Springs, and Vanessa. And we were getting on a plane to come down to the first Lyceum at Sherman. And back then, you know, in my practice, I'd looked at it and I thought, gosh, over a 3-year period that I was in my practice, 30 patients, new patients a month, all of them coming to my 2.5-hour healthcare class. When I left that office, I'd influenced 2,000 people with chiropractic, 2,000 families. But then it dawned on me, if you can get to a place like Sherman, and we were graduating a few hundred chiropractors a year, and they're going to practice for 40 years, and if they're seeing 30 new patients a month, I did the math last night, 72 million people, right, indirectly. So back then, I was trying to get, I was just thankful to get a 10-minute slot on Lyceum. Reggie would call us up. Where's Irene? Reggie would call us up. And since nobody was going to Lyceum, no one knew what it was, he'd invite you down to speak and he'd give you 10 minutes. So it was all speakers, but we were all there to be able to get a chance to get on the stage. And I had my 10-minute presentation all set to go. This is the universe part. I'd worked hard on it. months and months and months. Forget a TED Talk. They didn't even exist then. This was a 10-minute presentation that I was going to get on Sunday morning when everybody was either still in bed or they'd already checked out and were going home on the airplane. And on Saturday afternoon were all the big talks, and it was 3 speakers, Tom Gilardi, Reggie Gold, and the last speaker was Earl Powell, who was not a chiropractor. He had a magazine called Voice for Health. And he broke his tooth while Reggie was speaking, and they had to take him to the dentist. And someone came up to me, I think it was Tom Gilardi, and said, do you think you could stretch your 10 minutes into an hour and follow Reggie? That was my first presentation at Sherman, right? Anyway, so we were headed down to the first Lyceum, and then you see Vanessa sitting there. Whoops, you already saw that. That's my New Jersey picture, by the way. What? I put that one in just for Jersey, right? Thought that looked good with the wife beater and all that kind of stuff. Anyway. And I have to tell you, this is Europe, so the Speedo is okay. It's in Europe. I was looking at all these pictures. You made me feel terrible at how much weight I've gained with all those early pictures. Anyway, and this is Vanessa and my daughter Alexis. And then this. And I guess this is what I'd like to make a couple comments on. So this is my daughter Alexis, and Ty, you probably don't know it, that's you, right? My grandson Ty. So Alexis was born in Phoenix, Arizona. Vanessa was 5 at the time. We found out 20 years later that the city of Phoenix had not regulated their water supply. They'd pulled some corners, done some angles, and there was a chemical in the water that should have been about 30 parts per million that was 3,000 parts per million. And the kids that were born at that time in this area of Phoenix, Arizona, when the hormones kicked in, when they hit puberty, tumors started to grow. A proportionally large number of the boys got testicular cancer, and a whole bunch of the girls that were born at that time, we think because of this chemical, had tumors that showed up in their chest, in their breasts. And Alexis was one of them. We didn't know that at the time. We just knew that she was having trouble breathing. She was tired all the time. And at the school she was going to in LA, the art school, they had, the school nurse had checked her out, and they sent her to see an MD, which was part of their protocol for insurance. And the MD said she's fine, she's just working too much. And we didn't buy it. We sent her down the road to a friend of ours who was a chiropractor, and he found the tumor in her chest. I look at everything that medicine did, what they're supposed to do, which is find all those pathologies, they don't even find them. Chiropractor found them with his training. You follow me? And because that chiropractor, I got to spend a night with her before she passed away. She probably would have died in a dorm room in LA had it not been for that chiropractor. So while people thank me, it's chiropractic that I think. You follow me? And I was sitting next to a guy yesterday. I'm really still pissed off about it, but he reminded me of the 2 MDs that took care of her that night. They came in, they did some x-rays, they were going to take her in the next day, and they had 2 courses. They could take 2 paths. One was a dramatic path of going in, getting into her chest, taking out a piece of the tumor, and at the same time collapsing the pericardium around her heart. Because that's what was having her difficulty breathing when she laid down, this swollen bag around her heart, the pericardium. Or they could go in just with a micro incision, just get a piece of the tissue and find out what they were dealing with, and then come back for another day. We talked to them about it. I wanted to know what were the side effects, and I'll tell you why this is important. I said, what are the side effects of collapsing the pericardium? And the doctor said to me, there are no side effects, which is bullshit. You and I both know you can't do any, there may be minimal, but there's always a side effect when you're doing something to the body, especially something dramatic like that. And so we got in an argument before she went into surgery, and we told him, we wrote, when they had us sign the form, you cannot collapse the pericardium, do not do a major incision, Just get the tissue sample and let's find out what we're working with. Of course, they are so arrogant that they believe they have the right to make decisions about our health, whether it's vaccination, whether it's drugs we're supposed to take, whether it's doping up our kids in school, or going into surgery, even though we prohibited them from doing it, and doing what they wanted to do anyway. And they went in and collapsed the pericardium, and because of that, we found out later, innate is not stupid. The body does things for reasons. It had built up that fluid around the heart because when they collapsed it, the tumor then laid down on the arteries going to her brain, and she was dead in just a few minutes. And then they covered it up and lied about it until the pathologist at the hospital couldn't take it any longer. And then I remember the arrogance of them writing to me. And they sent me a note one time. One of the doctors said, "We're sorry we couldn't save your daughter." And I have to tell you, I have a lot of anger in my heart about that. I wrote back to him and I said, "I didn't need you to save my daughter. I just needed you to not kill her." Let me tell you what, I think there are three things that would have made a difference in the outcome of that, right? The first one is our philosophy. Our philosophy says that the body is an intelligent, self-developing, self-healing, self-maintaining mechanism. Right? Their philosophy is it's just a machine that goes bad and breaks down. Our philosophy says because of that, we should always honor the body and ask, why is the body doing this? Because there's always a reason. Their reaction is, the body just screws up. We don't know why it happens. We just have to deal with it when it shows up. You follow me? I think that if they would have held our vitalistic philosophy, and by the way, it's more than that. Ian Coulter wrote a piece in a philosophy text he wrote about the 5 conversations going on in the world today. Vitalism versus mechanism. Naturalism versus artificialism. What's the best way to birth a child, naturally or artificially? What's the best way to get immunity, through exposure to dirt, dust, and dander, or artificial vaccination? Major conversation today. The third one is humanism versus authoritarianism. What rights do patients have in the doctor-patient relationship? Do they have the right to informed consent? Do they have the right to know what treatments are available, even if that doctor doesn't provide them? Do we have the right as parents to make decisions about our own health and our children's health? Or does the state, does a doctor have the right to make those decisions for us? Humanism versus authoritarianism. The fourth conversation is reductionism versus holism. Can we understand a person's health by looking at them as just an eye, ear, nose, or throat, or do we have to understand the whole thing and how it fits in the environment and its relationships in those environments? And the last one is conservative therapeutics versus high-risk interventions. Does regular, low-cost, low-risk interventions applied consistently and regularly throughout life allow us to avoid high-risk interventions except in emergencies, drugs, radiation, and surgery? I have to tell you, if those doctors would have held what you and I hold, vitalism, holism, naturalism, humanism, conservative therapeutics, as their approach to dealing with the body, they wouldn't have done what they did to my daughter in that room that day. But because of their mechanism, reductionism, authoritarianism, right, high-risk interventions, and the arrogance that goes along with it, they go in and do whatever they think they ought to do, whatever they think is right. I think the first thing that would have made a difference in my daughter's life was if they held a philosophy like we hold in chiropractic. Wouldn't you agree? And I don't say that as some theoretical thing. I think it absolutely influences what they do and what we do on a day-to-day basis. The second thing that I think would have made a difference in that process was the notion that with a vitalistic viewpoint, we know that we're not there to manipulate the body to what we think it should be. We're there to get rid of the interferences so it can express the potential that it has. You understand the dramatic difference between mechanism and vitalism. Mechanism says manipulate the organism, make it do what you want to do. Mechanism says manipulate the environment to try to save the environment. Vitalism says it's already perfect, just get rid of the interferences. And we know there are 3 interferences to the nerve system. And I agree with what Chuck said. We are a neurologically based institution, not a bone-based institution. We're neurologists first as chiropractors, yes? And in fact, the conference we had that Jerry's now the director of, the Octagon, The second conference was a group of neurologists, neurophysiologists, neuroanatomists from different professions. And when they came together, they said this in the white paper they wrote afterwards. Every single structure in your body is there for one reason and one reason only, and that's to keep your nerve system alive and healthy as it goes through its process of conscious evolution in life. We are our nerve systems. You follow me? That's where we have memory. That's where we have relationship. That's how we perceive the universe. That's how we're connected to each other. It's our nerve system. And so within all of that, we know there are three things that affect the nerve system. Physical traumas, everything from concussions and subluxations to falling off a horse and breaking your neck if you're Superman. We know there are chemical traumas from the environment, cigarette smoke, drugs, pesticides in foods, mercury in vaccines, all those things that influence our body, our nervous system in an adverse way. And the third thing are the emotional stresses that damage and traumatize our nervous system throughout life. Whether it's seeing a friend blown up in a bomb in Iraq or an 8-year-old girl being sexually abused when she's growing up. All that's locked inside our nervous systems and interferes with the function of our nervous system. And in life, what we're about is having degree programs that eliminate those interferences from the nervous system. You follow me? All of our degree programs, all of them are oriented towards eliminating one or more of those interferences to the nervous system. I think if those doctors that day would have gone in rather than in a consciousness of manipulating the organism to what they think it should be, to going in and asking, why is the body doing this? How can we get rid of the interferences so the body can do what it's supposed to do, that they would have had a different relationship with my daughter in that operating room. And I believe that in the bottom of my heart. And the third thing that I think goes to it is this attitude. A guy got on the plane yesterday when I was flying here from Atlanta, and he was loud and annoying, and people were coming on that were obviously in his party. He was sitting in first class. He didn't know what to do with the blankets that were on his seat. He's handing them to them, telling them to do something with it. Then he started dropping stuff out of the overhead on me, which really pissed me off because it was my hair. Right? And then he sits down and he's barking at someone on some staff member on, the head thing that he's got on, right? And I said to myself, this guy's either an MD or a drug rep. And he was the latter, or the former, right? And he's talking about new drugs that got come out that's going to change the melanomas and going on. And I almost had the conversation with him I had with a drug rep one day, which was, I was sitting next to a drug rep that was exactly the same way. Obviously in a corporate level, not just selling drugs. He was a corporate level at a drug company. And so we talked for a while, and once I gained his confidence, and I asked him, said, how do you guys get away with knowing that the products that you produce are going to kill a certain number of people and children, and you actually set aside money for the lawsuits that are going to come from that? I said, because any other profession in the world that actually plotted that they were going to do things and they knew people were going to die because of what they did, we'd convict them and send them to jail. I said, how do you guys get away with that anyway? He didn't say anything to me for the rest of the flight, right? Watch, it's true though, isn't it? We just had the Truth, Transparency, and Freedom program that's going around the country on Life's campus about a month, maybe not even a month ago, 3 weeks ago. Hundreds of people showing up, and they're getting ready, and they're going to go down and march on the CDC, the Center for Disease Control, who with those same attitudes of mechanism and authoritarianism, et cetera, have been lying to us for 20 years, telling us there's no link between vaccine and autism. And they have the report from 20 years ago, the first one. It's not the only one. They have the report 20 years ago. They knew there was a connection. And they wouldn't say anything about it until one of the people that worked there 9 months ago smuggled out documents, smuggled out the research, and released it to the press. And then when the CDC was confronted with it and had to release the research, they doctored it. They took African American males out of the report because they're 5 times higher to have reactions to vaccines than the rest of the population. So they took them out of the report to make it look like it was less severe than what it really was. Shame on them. That's all I can say. Shame on them. You follow me? And so we were holding the truth, transparency, and freedom. We said, you need a place to meet? You can meet on Life's campus, right? And during the course of getting ready for that, about 2 days before, we found out that Louis Farrakhan was going to come speak. People remember that name, right? Louis Farrakhan. He creates some media attention wherever he goes, right? And all of a sudden, people from the community were all upset that we were allowing Louis Farrakhan on our campus. And I had to put out a public statement. One of them had to do, or part of it had to do with academic freedom and the right in America to stand up and say what you want to say. And then you have to be willing to defend it, but you have the right to stand up and say it. But it ended with this statement that as far as I knew, and I've looked, I can't find one single person that Louis Farrakhan has ever killed. And yet, there are thousands of children killed every year because of the pharmaceutical industry, and maybe we don't have our priorities right about who's being let on whose campus to speak. Yes? Yes. It's about time that we get some perspective on all of these things. And so I think those two things would made a difference in my life. And then the third thing, having to do with this sort of arrogant, authoritarian attitude, came to me, and the picture's not up anymore, of the day with the Dalai Lama. He's a guy. He's an incredible guy, and he's a jokester, and he's fun to be around. And he was in Atlanta speaking to 5,000 people, and Brendan Osawa da Silva, the other person you saw in the picture, has helped coordinate his visits to Atlanta, and we had requested through Brendan a private audience with the Dalai Lama. And he knows what's going on at Life. He loves what's going on at Life University. And I'll tell you a couple of things in a moment because we're getting close to the end. But he loves what's going on at Life University. And what he normally does is he addresses a group of 5,000 people, breaks 2 or 3 hours for lunch. During lunch, he does private audiences. Then he goes back and sort of wraps up the afternoon with 5,000 people. He was traveling a lot. He's getting up in age. He was tired. He canceled all of his private audiences except the one with Life University. And so we sat down, and by the way, a private audience with him is in a room about this size right here. And since he's a head of state, when he's here, the U.S. government provides him security. So there's 10 guys and CIA guys in black suits with all the earphones and talking in their wrists. When you saw the picture with myself, the Dalai Lama, and Brendan, just on the other side of the camera were 10 guys in CIA suits. And then he's also a terrorist in China, remarkably, because of the Tibet deal. So the U.S. government provides him 10 military people, guys in fatigues, automatic weapons, hand grenades and knives strapped all over their bodies. So they were in the room, right, with the CIA guys. Then you got all the monks, and then you got the press. That's a private audience with the Dalai Lama, right? And so you sit down. When you come into the room, you saw us wearing the white scarves around our neck. They give those to you ahead of time. They're about 10 feet long. And you hold them like this when he comes in, and he takes them, and he says a prayer over them, and then he puts it around your neck, and then you sit down and have a conversation. And the conversation's fun. My foot was in a walking cast at the time. We're talking about ankle replacements. And, I'm there to talk about the vision of Life University, and he wants to talk about my foot, And so we had this great conversation. And at the end of it, we invited him to come to Life's campus. And because of the stuff we're doing, he said, sure. And then the monks go crazy because he makes those commitments, and now they have to make them real somehow. And so he'll be here into the year, beginning of next year. They only give you about 30 to 60 days notice before he shows up. He'll be on Life's campus. To dedicate, and I'm going to tell you why in just a moment when I wrap up. Well, let me tell you now. There are these books we put out here, right? This is what's going on with us. At Life University, there's some incredible stories going on. I just want to mention a couple of them. One of them is, and it's a program that Jerry heads, we have a think tank called the Octagon. The Octagon they take a bunch of academics on a particular topic, and we put them in a room for 2 or 3 days, and they talk to each other. By the way, the reason why we don't let people come watch this, because it's really boring. It's really boring, right, to watch a bunch of these people talk. And when they get done talking, they write this incredible stuff and give us direction. That's what they do. For 5 years, we had a conversation with different academics on vitalism and how to operationalize vitalistic philosophy into national healthcare policy. And out of that's coming a center on doing that. We don't have a name for it yet, non-medical vitalistic healthcare policy and how that would influence everything from patient care to insurance companies to government regulation. And we have a woman by the name of Beth May coming, and one of the first conferences they're having is this fall on opioids, right, which now kill more people than automobile accidents in the United States. And the number one reason why they get hooked on opioids that are prescribed to them by the docs is for neck and back pain. Forget the big picture about chiropractic, just neck and back pain, we got a solution to the opioid issue in the United States. You follow me? So we're having a conference at Life in this octagon with this woman, Beth May, I'll get this wrong, Jerry, who basically is the person who in Washington, D.C. for years sort of headed up alternative healthcare at NIH and other places. Am I close? She was the original staff person for the Office of Alternative Medicine that Harkin set up, right? And started funding chiropractic research through that office. That was the reason for doing it. Anyway, when we get it all done, when the conference is all done, the intellectuals are coming together, the conference will be all done, we're going to get all the information out to you for your practices so that you have the fact sheets, you have information for patients, you have information for the press, that kind of thing, so you can use it to build your practices and begin to help get some of these people off these issues. That's what the Octagon does. We did 5 years of that, and then we switched gears 3 years ago to the conversation of integrity. What would integrity mean if we had it in education, in the media, in politics, etc.? And so we've been, Jerry's the director of the Octagon, and the first year we had this conversation, at the end of the year, end of the conversation, they created a Center for Compassion, Integrity, and Secular Ethics. And out of that center, 4 projects are currently running. One of them is called the Shalon Project. And what the Shalon Project is, it's a project for prisons. Many of you remember from the DE meetings, Sid talking about the prisoners of Shalon, the poem, about the 2 brothers chained in the tower that couldn't quite touch each other. And so out of respect of that particular poem, we named this project the Shalon Project. Life University is going to be the very first university in the United States, as far as we know, to offer associate and bachelor's degrees to people in prisons. And here's the reason why. There are more prisoners in jail in the United States than any other country in the world, including China, which has 4 times the population and doesn't mind locking people up. We comprise 5% of the world's population. 25% of all the prisoners in the world are in American jails. And even more disheartening is that not only from a financial standpoint, which is $80 billion a year, but from a human spirit standpoint, from a cultural standpoint about who we are as a country, 70% of them that get out of jail will wind up back in the criminal justice system. 70%. There's one small program in upstate New York, doesn't offer a degree, but they have an organized program. A lot of prisons have classes that you can take, but an organized A to Z program designed to get people ready to have a skill, to have a profession when they get out. There's one small program in upstate New York. In 18 years, the recidivism rate, rather than being 70%, in 18 years, only 1 prisoner has ever returned to prison that graduated from that program. We know that education reduces recidivism rates not a little, but from 70% to 2 to 3%. And so we've been spending 2 years working with the governor of Georgia and a number of people to get this done. This is not easy. There's a reason why no other university has ever taken this on. Number one, the guards don't want to do it. They don't get paid extra for it. They have to escort people to the classes. And because prisoners can't have computers in prison, and our accrediting agency says if a prisoner is enrolled in your program and they're your student, they have to have the same rights at Arendelle Women's Prison as a student that's taking a class on a campus in Marietta, Georgia, which means access to libraries, access to computers, all sorts of things. So now the guards have to escort them one at a time to sit at a computer and sit there with them while they're doing their homework. So we had to negotiate with the prison guards, and we just bought them off with scholarships for them and their children. And now they're really happy. They're excited about the program, right? We had to deal with the Department of Corrections, which doesn't leave a prisoner in the same place for 4 years. Because of the gang issues, they move them around all the time. Well, guess what? If they're going to get a degree, they need to be in the same place for 4 years. You follow? So the Department of Correction changed their policy. Wasn't easy, but they changed their policy so that if you're enrolled in the program at Arendelle Women's Prison, you get to stay there as long as you're in good standing academically. And since we can't offer degrees in all the prisons in Georgia, if you apply for enrollment in the program and you're accepted, they'll move you from whatever prison you're at to Arendelle Prison to be able to take the classes. And the last one was we had to deal with conservatives that said, wait a minute, I just spent $100,000 on my kid's education, and now you're going to give a convicted felon a free education on my dime? It's a legitimate argument. Except the $80 billion thing sort of swayed them that they should back off. And Jerry and the group in the Center for Compassion, Integrity, and Secular Ethics at the university have been following through with that. They've been working hard on this, and it starts this summer. And then we're going to add into it chiropractic and nutrition, and we're going to fulfill BJ's dream of emptying these goddamn prisons in the United States. And then on the other side, and I'm sorry, Jim, but gave me an award, I'm going to take advantage of it. On the other side of it, we had a group of midwives. Remember we said chiropractic implies a lifestyle? Guess what? We have to stand up for people that can't stand up for themselves. Let me say it again. We have an obligation to stand up for people that can't stand up for themselves. We had a group of in Georgia, except for one small little place in Savannah, a birthing center. You are not allowed to have a child outside of a hospital in Georgia. It's not illegal, but essentially it's impossible. No one does it. And you know the United States has the worst infant and maternal mortality rate of any industrialized country in the world. And of the 50 states that make up the United States, Georgia's at the bottom of the pile. If you were to put all the countries in the world on a list and Georgia were listed as a country, it would be below Botswana as far as infant and maternal mortality is concerned. And so, a group of midwives in Georgia, in Atlanta, fought for a decade and finally got what they call a certificate of need, a license, to have a birth center. But you can imagine if the health department is going to let you have a birth outside of a hospital, you can imagine the regulation that's going to come into play. They had to have an MD. They had to have the facilities built so they met all the health standards, blah, 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 of a hospital, et cetera. And they had 1 year to get all these things in place. And God bless them, they're great caretakers, but they have no business sense and no money. And at the end of the year, they missed their deadline. They went back, the state said, we'll give you 1 more year, but if you don't make it this time, don't come back to us again, ever. I met them in June. The deadline was December 27th of that same year. They still had nothing done. They didn't even have a location identified at that time. So we went to the Board of Trustees. That's why I love my bosses. And we said, you know what? We're going to need $100,000+. We're going to need your blessing, and we're going to need the right to expend energy and resources to help these people get established. And the board said, go. And we got it all done on December 24th. So in 6 weeks, a 17,000 square foot facility is going to open up in Midtown Atlanta. Half of it's the Atlanta Birth Center. The other half is Life University, Chiropractic and Functional Neurology. And while the birth center will actually make up a small portion of the patients we'll be seeing there, we will absolutely have a chiropractor at every birth from this point on. Right? So we're opening up programs in Rome. We're in China. We're opening up the Midtown Atlanta Clinic. We're opening up degree programs for prisoners, right? And the last thing is we've created a group of the principal college presidents. Life pulled together the principal college presidents in the world 4 years ago. And we created a group called the Rubicon. And the Rubicon has as its primary focus the spreading of principled chiropractic around the world. Mass public consumer education, starting chiropractic colleges and supporting them with money, expertise, etc., to get opened up, and sharing our resources as principled schools. So it's kind of like the Ivy League, if you will, of chiropractic colleges in the world. And we have 8 colleges in the program right now. There are 3 more in development, from Australia to China to Scotland. And we just found out this week that we have literally, because of moves that have made, the European Chiropractic Union, which has been a very pro-drug kind of movement in chiropractic, has come to us with a white flag and said, what do we need to do to have you engaged with us? Their ECCE went under. And so you know what? Unlike the other side, and this is my closing comment, the other side would use that advantage if they had it over us to wipe us out. That would be their purpose. The beautiful part about our side, we're not interested in wiping anybody out. We're just interested in having the freedom to do what we do and allowing them to do that also within the parameters of subluxation and no drugs and surgery. There has got to be some boundaries on this thing if we're going to call it chiropractic. And so as River pointed out, a new organization has started called One Chiropractic. It's not competitive with ICA or ACA any more than the Florida Physicians Association, which he pointed out, and it is true, are doing a fantastic job of moving their agenda for drugs forward in chiropractic. They are the hottest thing in chiropractic right now. They're sharp. But you know what? Belonging to them doesn't mean you're not also a member of the ACA. You follow me? So One Chiropractic is an organization. We expect to have 30,000 members within the next couple of years. There are 10 of us that were put together. There's no representative assemblies, no elections of presidents, none of that kind of stuff. It's just a group of 10 people with an executive director, a nonprofit group that's purpose is to ensure the brightest future of the individual chiropractor. We want to give the chiropractors what they need to be successful in chiropractic. And we know that we can use those numbers and resources to then have an influence of everything from drugs in New Mexico and trying to put a stop to that, to pushing our agenda forward through public relations and media. And what's great about it is it has a patient program associated with it called One Grateful Patient, the purpose of which is we expect to have 100,000 patients in it in a relatively short period of time. And then we think we have a voice that we can take and push chiropractic. So as River said, watch for it, get online, it's coming. These are some of the things that are in that little book I talked about. So my last comment, the thing that I think would have made a difference in my daughter's life. And that's what happened to me at the end of the session with the Dalai Lama. We didn't talk about her. We didn't talk about any of those issues. We talked about what I'm talking about here and asked him to come to the campus. And then when you get done, as the picture showed, he stands up and turns around towards the press and he holds your hand. And that's an indication that we're done, and then the press can start taking pictures. So we're standing there, and you know he's never worked a day in his life. His job is to study, to lead, but you know he doesn't do anything, right, basically. And I got these basketball hands, right? The grew playing basketball. And he's got these tiny little hands, and they're real soft, and I'm standing there, and I know it's supposed to be feeling absolutely, you know, spiritual. But all I could think about were how creepy his hands felt. Seriously, I hate to admit that. They were really creepy and soft. And I know he would laugh if I told him that. I'm going to tell him the next time I see him, right? But when I walked out of the room, I have to tell you, for 17 years, I hated those two MDs and what they did to my daughter. And I've heard that line 1,000 times, I know you have. Anger and hate, it's like drinking poison, thinking that somehow it's hurting the other person. And while we didn't talk about it, when I walked out of the room, just because of who he is, it was lifted off my heart. You follow? So you know what? I think 3 things would have made a difference, and I'm using my daughter only as a metaphor, because my daughter exists in every one of your communities in the world today. Our philosophy, first. Our recognition that it's about removing interference, not manipulating the body to what we think it should be. And not living in a world of arrogance, but a world of forgiveness and compassion and integrity and consideration. You follow me? And if we did that, I think I wouldn't have had to have the conversation with you today. I love all of you. More than anything, I love my family.